Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 245, Her Torah. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And on the subject that we've been thinking about over the last few weeks, feminism and the American Jewish community, this week's project takes it to a new level. Our guest today, artist Yael Kanarek, has been working since 2016 on an incredible project called Torah, which means Her Torah, to rewrite the entire Torah, the entire 5 books of Moses, or the Pentateuch, in Hebrew and English to reveal the divine feminine as a central presence in the Hebrew sacred texts. She's doing this by regendering the Bible, meaning that male characters become female and vice versa. Words and concepts that are written in the masculine in Hebrew are switched to the feminine and vice versa. And we'll discuss all this in depth. The first draft of Torah in Hebrew was completed in April of 2020, and Yael Kanarek is currently working with Bible scholar Tamar Biala on the second draft. They're also already writing commentaries to this work, and Yael Kanarek has been creating visual midrashim as fine art prints exploring ideas in Jewish thought through letters and form. BeitTorah.org, the home for study and ritual of this regendered Bible, was inaugurated just recently on the holiday of Simchat Torah with a service led by 2 rabbis, recent Judaism Unbound guest Mira Rivera and Emily Cohen. Beit Torah aims to lead by example with Jewish study and ritual held entirely in women's body language. You can visit this evolving site at www.beittorah.org. That's BeitToratah.org. And just a few more words on today's guest, Yael Kanarek. In addition to her work on Torah, she is a visual artist and jewelry designer whose practice focuses on the relationship between language and form. She works in various media such as internet art, large-scale sculpture, and fine jewelry. Yael Kanarek was born in New York City and raised in Israel. She returned in the early 1990s to study and practice art and became known for her internet art trilogy, World of Awe. She has exhibited her work at the Jewish Museum, the Whitney Museum, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and many more. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Rockefeller New Media Grant, I-Beam, and LABA, the Laboratory for Jewish Culture, where she designed the Hebrew font Gufanit for her fine jewelry collection. In 2018, she installed a large-scale sculpture commissioned by the U.S. Department of State at the new embassy in Zimbabwe. Yael is also an artist-in-residence at the Romemu congregation in New York City. I'll just note that in our conversation, we will talk about Torah, her Torah, or this regendered Bible project, and sometimes about Torato, his Torah, by which we mean the Torah as we've had it for thousands of years. And I should also note that the goal is not to replace Torato with Torah, but rather for Torah to stand alongside Torah as a work of Jewish sacred literature. And with that, we could not be more excited to get into this conversation. So Yael Kanarek, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Absolutely. So glad to be here.
I'll tell you, this is one of the projects that I would say I'm most excited about in the last 5 years. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because it's exactly the kind of bold, we've talked about the chutzpah versus knowledge curve. Like, it's a lot of chutzpah in a good way to regender the entire Bible. So, or the entire Torah, at least. Maybe I'll get to the Bible, down the road, the rest of the Bible. All right.
You heard it here first, folks.
So can we start by you telling us a bit of the story of how you came to take on this project?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So about, I think, 15 years ago, I was asked to lead a Seder, and I picked up the Haggadah, and I was reading through it. And then I stumbled on, I came to Adonai Eloheinu, and I was kind of scratching my head. It was like, Adonai is plural, my lords, Eloheinu, our gods. My lords, our gods. I was like, okay, wow, I never heard that before. I haven't noticed. And so I continued. I was like, okay, let's just read it like that the whole way. And I was shocked to realize that there are no women in the Haggadah, except for the Song of Miriam. There are no women. And I'm like, I've been doing this year after year, and I've never heard that. And what else am I not hearing? But at some point, I was studying from a man rabbi. He was teaching mostly men. And at some point he said, I actually don't know how to teach women. And then he also said something that at some point you have to start building the vessels for the divine. You have to start being the creator of those vessels. And I was thinking, I don't have anything to work with. I mean, I don't have language to work with. The only thing that I have received was that my position as a helpmate. I don't have the direct relationship to the Elohim. So that was frustrating. And then I realized there are no books at all. There's like a missing library. There's a whole library that is missing. I went to a class and we were studying one of the midrashim that kind of make cringe. And I was like, what if it was the other way around? I mean, how that would feel to a man to read that. And the teacher literally said, the text cannot be changed. And I'm an artist. When I hear something like that, I go like, interesting. Let's see how that works. And I went home and I typed, I went to the beginning because that's where I felt that the critical moment is when the Elohim creates the Adam in his likeness and image, a male and female created them. That there's some code in there that might be of help. And so I went home and I did, and Elohim created the Chovah in her likeness and image. That's where I was at that particular moment. Female and male created them. And I was looking at that. I was like, wow, okay, that's really interesting. Suddenly I felt that the volume, like literally the volume of the text went from 2 to 10.
Can you say a little bit more just to for a listener who may not be intimately familiar with the beginning of the Genesis story, in the Bible as we have it, the Torah, the male version of the Bible, the God Elohim creates the Adam, and his wife down the road is named Eve or Chava. Mm-hmm. And in your regendered version, you have the feminine version, Elohim, who is creating something that sounds like Chava or Eve, but you've actually changed it a little bit, so it's Chova. So just to set it there, that you're kind of rewriting the story of the creation of human beings, or I know you've written human beings also, that in a way that really fundamentally reorients it around the first creation being of this woman, this Chova. Mm-hmm. And that's how, and so then when that happens, your experience of it is it's mind-blowing. What was it that you saw as soon as you did that?
Well, first of all, I understood agency. That's a different way of looking at the world. That was, at that moment, I start to understand the divine inspiration coming through me, through this kind of mother-daughter lineage. Now let's look at the world through that. So that was really, really quite a revelation. And then it was naturally like, okay, what else is here? Let's just do the whole thing. And later I just found, one of the tools, which I love, I'm as a contemporary artist, I'm trained to take things apart and rebuild them. I always try to look under the hood, turn something on its head. There's a long history within the Jewish tradition of plowing, or really kind of going into text is finding words in other words. Compound words are taken apart and reshuffle, or letters are changed, alifine or samachsin are changed to reveal other meaning. And for me, this is like, this is building blocks for making art. This is how I love that. So in Elohim, there is the En, the nothing. There is the Ele, these, Ele, Elohim, or Elah, goddess. And there is in the mirror of the end of Elohim, and the beginning, you get the Ani. So now in Elohim, you have this really interesting relationship between the I, the self, the nothing, and in between the things. And I think this is a really interesting layer of definition for the word Elohim or the divine that is really encompassing with it the relationship that the self has with the infinite. I thought that was a very nice way to actually start the, Torah story. And now we're not even talking about sexual organs. Now, if people feel they need that, it's always going to be in Torah. Torah is not going anywhere. And the whole idea of Torah is not to come and erase Torah. The idea of Torah is to open these stories to the perspective of women when the divine inspiration comes directly through a mother-daughter relationship, because now with this full agency through the story, we can build and create new meaning, and we don't even know what that meaning is.
Can you talk to us about what actually is changing? It's because I think I don't want somebody to listen and be like, okay, cool. We changed the genders. Great. The story's still the same, but now different characters are existing because it's sort of the men are now women. It's much deeper than that. The actual foundation of what the story is changes. And I'd love for you to open up for us what that looks like. And I mean, maybe I'm thinking of what you did with the story of Abram and Sarai, who become Abraham and Sarah. All their names in that part of the story change. Isaac, too. I won't spoil what all the names are. I'll let you talk about that. But what happens in this text when you move forward from that initial story and you go into the remainder of Genesis, the other books? How do things change when we do more of this gender flipping in the text of the Torah?
So Abraham means high father. Ram means high. So it became Em Rama, high mother. Sarah, it was Sarai first, but we ended up with Sar. We couldn't trace the source for the name. And it's close. And after she becomes Sarah with the hey, it means minister. So we went with Sar. These are the high characters. Hagar became Hagar, the stranger. I mean, it's there in the letters, and it fits into her role and the way she connects to that. I think one of the really striking differences are actually in another story, and that's the story of Moshe. When Moshe is born and she's put in a basket on the Teor, what we call the Nile. In Hebrew, it's Yeor, but it also means, it has the words, light will come, light will become. And we change it to Te'o in the feminine form. I think what's interesting there, it's that it's now Moshe means she will lift out of the water. It literally means that. So Moshe becomes Moshe. But it's now the son of Parah who comes down to the river. And he sees the child, the girl, the baby girl, and his heart goes to her. And it's now her brother who overlooks from a distance. And it's her father who's now called to nurse her. So what we were able to do is bring men into the child caring part of life. These are men we know in our lives, but they never had a voice in these particular narratives or in the context of what we consider as reverent or something to protect. And this is really beautiful. And the way we did that is that the verb yalad, to give birth, is used interchangeably for women and men in the story. So we just added conceive, we added nurse. And what happens is that the understanding of these words start to change. If you want to imagine men becoming pregnant and nursing children, you can do that. But we can also understand these words as caring for children. And now the daughters are the prime child. The father is built in his society. He gains value from having daughters. We never, ever, ever hear that at all, ever in our world. That it starts to change the mind. It starts to send these signals to our mind to ask for a rebalancing. It takes women, or at least my consciousness, out of the place that I'm constantly trying to fight for a place. I don't have to fight for a place. Here's the place. That's what it looks like. Is it always pretty? Absolutely not. Torah is not pretty. And there are a lot of very difficult stories to negotiate. But when the story is difficult, that's when, we make a greater effort at them. And that's where these new conversations start to come up.
I just want to re-emphasize for our listeners that, like you were just saying, with very few exceptions when it was absolutely necessary, you didn't add anything new here. You're simply regendering the Bible. And so there's no, additional paragraphs here. It's more what happens to you as a reader when you start to see it this way, and you notice things like you're saying. And so in that particular story, what I noticed is that when Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden, right, we think of it as like they ate from the tree of knowledge and they realized they were naked, and so God gave them some clothes, and that's kind of how we understand, and you could say, well, they understood sexuality, and so they were ashamed they had to cover that up, whatever it is. But what really comes through in the way that you have it, and reinforced by how you're talking about this is fundamentally a birth process, is that they were given skins, meaning they were given their skin. That before that human beings didn't have skin. They were bones and flesh. And that is something that's in the original text, but you don't quite see it unless you're brought into it through this through this metaphor of birth, right?
I mean, I love now the creation of the woman is really interesting, because the first creation is the ability to sense. The second creation is where more material starts to come on. So the chovah is created from breath and dust of the earth. And the man is created out of bone and flesh, out of her rib. By the fact that he's brought to her, she calls him Ish. And by that, she makes herself Isha. So it's another layer of becoming these creatures, these conscious creatures. Then they're brought into the celestial womb. They're like children in there. They behave like children. I didn't do that. She did do that. It's like that kind of level of conversation. And then there's the moment where their birth begins by the fact that they start to experience themselves as separate. And it's a painful separation. Elohim wants to, it's hard to let them go. Basically, what she's telling them is what's going to be outside the womb. It can't be as, comforting. You don't have that kind of protection. And she dresses them with skin. There's no sin. It has to happen, and it's messy.
There's one story that I wanted to ask you about, in part because it's on my mind because we recently did a project about it, which is the Binding of Isaac story, or in this version, the Binding of Yitzchak. The reason why it struck me, particularly reading it in this regendered way, was because there was a particular video that was made in our project on the Binding of Isaac by a mother, an Orthodox woman, whose son came out as gay, and that was seen negatively in parts of that community, and that in a way she felt that the community was asking her to sacrifice her son by basically moving away from him because of his sexual orientation, and she refused to do that. She refused to sacrifice her son. It was a very powerful video. It actually went kind of pseudo-viral in a certain element of this Orthodox community because I think people really felt the power of it. And it got me really thinking about that story before I even knew about your project, that would this story really have been possible if Judaism had come from a kind of divine feminine point of view, right? Meaning, would a feminine God ask for a human sacrifice? Would a mother really ever be willing to sacrifice her daughter in the way that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son?
Well, the question that this really allows us to raise is, do we really think that a father can take their son to sacrifice them? How does that land with us now? But it allows us to think about what do we and how do we sacrifice our daughter for? And now we can all be at the table, because otherwise where's Sarah? She doesn't know. She doesn't know. I mean, things have been, stories have been written about that as well. But her voice, she's not even there. So now Emrama is in the room, and Titzchak, which literally means she will laugh, is in the room. And we did the first Aliyah ever on this parasha. And we did it Torato, Torata, line by line, during a Gen Network event. And wow, that was really, really amazing. Having agency in the story, even if the story is not pretty, I can't even tell you how freeing it is. And I think you can have a bigger conversation. I mean, you can even say things like, okay, Abraham is taking Titzchak to sacrifice her, or Emrama is taking Yitzchak to sacrifice him. I mean, when you have two sides of the story, then they can start to mate. I think the ideas that we have about what women can or cannot do are opening up. And it's been a relatively short period of time in human history that we've been seeing this. And so one of the things that I love about Torah is that I'm not coming to it from the point of view of what I think women would or would not do. I'm putting things on the table and say, let's have a conversation about that, because we're in the process of discovery. Is Torah at the end of it? No, it's like 1.0. It's totally 1.0. I mean, it's a big project for 1.0, but it has to be 1.0. We have to have a library of sacred books that speak of women's experience in these sacred terms. We need to have that. Not only for women, for everyone. I also have to say that I don't necessarily think that this would, solve the social order, but it informs it in a very bright light. It's like X-ray. There are languages that don't have gender. Systems are still designed through a man's mind. Even when people say, so why not just go straight to non-binary? We're not in binary. The perspective in which things are moving in the world are designed in a man's mind. We need to know what the female mind is.
For me, what's so liberating and exciting about this project is, so there's two layers. One is just the new text in and of itself, a whole new set of options for interpretation. I mean, you hinted at this before, but like the way Jewish interpretation works in traditional texts, and even less traditional texts, is like honing in on letters and like playing around with the specific letters. And like all of a sudden I was thinking to myself, oh, if I inhabited a parallel universe, or this universe, where the character is Aim Rama once again, where the first two letters are Aleph Mem instead of Aleph Bet, all of a sudden I'd be thinking to myself, oh, in Hebrew, the word Im is the same letters, Aleph Mem, if. So like all of a sudden I could be like, oh, wow, the father, there I am slipping. The mother of Jews, Aim Rama, or Abraham, like, is like, I could make the interpretive claim that like the mother of ifs, the if mother, the high if, like these are all creative translations of Aim Rama. And then I could do like my whole thing about, Judaism is a liturgy of questions and arguments and ifs. And like, I could do a whole thing with that. And like, maybe it sounds ridiculous when the first time we do it, yeah. But if you do that and then 100 years pass, all of a sudden that's traditional.
Exactly.
And I feel like we could easily do that.
That's how it's done. That's how it's made.
Yeah. And so like, it just gets me really like riled up and energized. But like I'm flashing to a class I took in rabbinical school last year where this didn't involve changing any text. This was actually we read like a scholarly journal article. I'm blanking on the name, but I'm going to try to find it and put it in the show notes on our website. This scholarly article took an approach to the Book of Ruth, so not Torah anymore, the Book of Ruth, and it encouraged a homonormative reading. which is opposed to a heteronormative reading, where you assume as a general rule in a heteronormative reading that like people are heterosexual. So like you assume that a woman would be attracted to a man, you assume a man would be attracted to a woman. Homonormative reading assumes as the norm that men would be attracted to men and women would be attracted to women. All of a sudden, the Ruth and Naomi parts in the book of Ruth, for those who haven't read it, like I encourage you to read it in this way. Like the Ruth and Naomi parts feel really, really fascinating and interesting when you're assuming as a starting point that women are interested in women. Mm-hmm. And there's also stuff with Boaz, this other character, this guy character, where he has some interesting tension with this sort of sideline male character that you don't spot if you're not thinking of it. Mm-hmm. If you don't spot it if you're thinking in a heteronormative way. What this does for me is it's really not just about switching one piece. It opens up choice. It allows us to make choices as readers and say, oh, today Abraham can be a male figure because that serves this particular look at the book of Genesis. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow, Abrahama is a female character because and by the way, I have no problem asserting, I mean, this gets to broader questions about gender. Like, I have no problem asserting that one person can perform, to use a Judith Butler term, a different gender identity at different points in their story. Like, that's not, I think that's perfectly possible. Mm-hmm. And so then the question is like, what do we do? Right. So my question is like, what would you encourage people to do with this liberating, incredible set of possibilities of like, oh, we now have all these choices? What does somebody leading a text study do with that? What does somebody reading do with that? What does somebody just like looking to grow spiritually do with that? Like, what does it actually mean for people that are working with these texts?
We just recently started Beit Torah with a weekly service led by Rabbi Mira Rivera and Rabbi Emily Cohen. If you, for example, a person who's connect to Judaism through ritual, come to our Torah rituals, because all the prayers now are in the female form. So all the familiar prayers now you're going to stumble upon them and you're going to rehear them. And so that's, a way to do this kind of, or meet our patriarchal conditioning. It's a really good way to meet that. If you're a person like me who likes to go deep into the text and like take it apart and, who likes to live in there, we're going to have many source sheets and different parts that you can start engaging. And, a commentary is huge. So what I've learned from doing this is, first of all, there's this big tree of story, and it continued past Torah and Tanakh into Christianity and Mormonism and Islam and other, religions and, different denominations. It really comes to life with commentaries. So, and additional stories. So if you don't have patience to wait for us to do that, go ahead and do it. These stories are in public domain. They belong to all of us. And if you feel inclined and want to do it, go ahead and do it. If you need to hear this in a different way, go ahead and do it. It's our stories.
I wanted to ask you some questions about basically being an artist and how you approach this as an artist, because in a way, part of why I'm so excited about this project is I've been fantasizing for years about this hypothetical artist who understands that the medium of art is Judaism itself, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, we think of an artist as somebody who's going to make some nice Jewish music, somebody who's going to make some nice Jewish paintings. When I'm talking about an artist, I'm talking about somebody who comes and says, my canvas or my paints is Judaism, but rather than seeing Judaism the way that we're often trained to see it, which is that basically Judaism is a piece of art that somebody else made, and it's our job to either copy it very very exactly, like you almost think of a first-year art student sitting in the museum and trying to, trying to paint that exact picture. And it looks like a Rembrandt, but it's not a Rembrandt because Rembrandt made the Rembrandt. You just copied it, And in a way, that's kind of some version of that is how we're trained to imagine our relationship with Judaism. And I think for a lot of us, that's not very exciting. And so I've been talking about this hypothetical artist that will come along and show us what it looks like when you take the material of Judaism itself and, like you were saying earlier, just naturally take it apart and put it back together. Years ago, I talked to Ruth Calderon, who we've had on the show, who runs basically a Talmud or Jewish text study organization, primarily focused on artists in Israel. And I asked her, why did she focus on artists? And she said it's because, I don't have to train an artist to do that, taking apart and putting back together. That's just what they do. Mm-hmm. So all I have to do is teach them the text, and then they're going to do interesting things with it. So I would love to hear how you reflect on that as an artist and the story of, coming to this. And if you were trying to encourage people that were listening to this to come with that orientation to other elements of Judaism, how would you describe the artist's way in Judaism?
So for me, the only way to actually know something is to make. I don't remember very well. The only way for me to understand something is through making. And I think the description you brought up about the artists going to the museum to copy a Rembrandt is great, because I've done a lot of that, even recently. And what I've learned doing that is that I'm able, by doing that, is slip my hand into Da Vinci's hand. If I really follow closely his lines, I can embody him or his movement on the paper. You can really feel it. So, and the way children learn the fastest, through imitation. We learn through imitation. That's the greatest tool for learning. So I started asking myself, okay, so how is this done? So I was like, okay, let me try and do it. I was like, oh, okay, that's how it works. Commentary, because we're so trained to receive it as like this monolithic thing you can't touch, but we made it. I just ran into this. There's the precursor story for the flood is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is much older. And one of the things people so it describes what is brought into the ark. The family members and the craftsman, the artist. They bring the artist in to the, and that was dropped in the, in the Genesis form of the story. The artists are out. But if you go to any synagogue without the craftsman, without the sofristam, without the, the people who make everything and visualize everything, without the musicians, you don't have a religion, really. There's nothing there. What is going to be left with? Who is going to be there to comment on anything? And I see it also in text. There's texts that I personally love. For example, the text where they start to work on the craftsman, the building of the covenant, and Moshe calls on Betzalela Bat Ori, daughters. Yeah,
the tabernacle. Just to clarify,
Yes, the tabernacle. And Betzalela means Betzalela, under the shadow of goddess, daughter of my light. This is the kind of mental space you need to start working on the aspects of the tabernacle. I feel when I read this text now, I can feel it in my fingers. It's like tickling, I was like, oh, yes, I'm right there. I'm right there with the text. I know what this is. I know how to make that work. It's fantastic. Or when Moshe receives the tablets, the first set of tablets is made by Elohim, right? They said it's made out of stone, but they're kind of like, they're written from both sides. She takes them down. They're no good, clearly, because the people are in a completely different space, mental space. These are probably undecipherable for those people. They got a break. But then Elohim tells Moshe to sculpt them. She uses the word sculpt, lefasel. And I'm like, I'm right there with her. I know what lefasel means. I know what sculpting means. How you do this kind of cutting, projecting a piece of yourself into material. I know how it feels. I know what it means. So I know what she's doing there, how she's projecting her human self into this work, because it needs to come from the bottom. And then when she goes up, Elohim says, I will write on the tablet, but it's Moshe who writes on the tablet. So I know that too. As an artist, I know what these things mean from experience. I could never, ever even dream to know any of this in Torah. I would not even consider that I'm part of that in any way at all. Betzalel Ben Uri is that other person. That's the difference for Torah. It's right in happening within my domain of experience. It's very scary for people. I get it. I get it. But the view is amazing. The view is amazing.
I love that you talked about the tablets and the idea of sculpting and sculpture with the tabernacle. I often think about sculpture, and one of the best lessons I ever got growing up in school, like one of the few things that I actually vividly remember from growing up in school, was my art teacher, when we were going to the art museum for a field trip, said to us, it is very important that when you look at the sculptures, and we had whatever worksheets we were supposed to do at the museum, and who was the sculptor for this thing? What was the story behind it? To make sure we actually read the descriptions, whatever. And the art teacher said to us, when you look at the sculptures, you have to walk all the way around it, and you have to look at it from all the different sides. Because if you look from just the side where the label is, you're only going to see part of the story. You're only going to see it from one perspective. So you got to walk around the whole thing. So it's clear what I'm doing here. This is a metaphor. I also mean it literally. It is actually a literal thing that when you look at a sculpture, a statue from different sides, you actually see a different thing. But also it's a metaphor, right? You're bound to understand something new about a text if you look at it from a different angle, from a different perspective, and in this case, with different pronouns. Mm-hmm. So that sculpture piece sort of brought that to me. So I thank you. The other piece I wanted to bring up, though, is you've actually been even more ambitious than it might have sounded thus far, which is, I only mean that positively. Folks thus far would know that you have taken on the project of rewriting the Torah with changing the different genders. What you've also done is you've started to do commentary. I loved, you sent us a few prep documents, and you sent us these little commentaries on the new text, which honestly, I think for a tradition, there are some Jews, not all Jews, but there are some Jews for whom the Torah, you can't really even learn the Torah without looking at the commentaries. There are people who really only read it through the lens of the medieval commentators and their interpretations of the text. And so when people are reading the Torah, it's almost like you've got two fingers that you've got to have out. One is your finger is on the core text in the middle of the page in a Chumash, in one of the 5 books of Moses books. And the other finger is in the side commentary to understand what the different interpretations are. You've already given some of those interpretations from the new Torah angle. And I'm curious, is your vision there that you yourself you called it the Kanarit, the canary commentary, because your name is close to canary, which I thought was awesome. And there's also the dates honey commentary, because Tamar means date, and your co-commentator is named Tamar, which I love those word plays, but that's awesome. Is your idea there that you're going to do this, that the two of you are going to do commentary for the whole thing in addition to all the core text that you're doing? Or is the thought hey, everyone, let's do this commentary. Here's an example that I, the canary commentator, are given. Now your turn. What's your take on that?
One of the things that happens is the commentary just emerges in the process of regendering. As we go through it, we go oh, wow, that's an interesting idea. Okay, let's write it down. And then it also, we felt that some of the new text is could be confusing for people. So it's sort of to help, especially with the names. If you don't know the meaning of the names, you're actually missing an important method in which the story tells the story. So the names are really important. So just even clarifying that, you can say it's commentary. But no, absolutely. Yeah, come on board. Yeah. But you have to remember, and this is hard to see unless, I can see it clearly, but it's hard to see from when we live in the Torah side of things, is that you have to grow a new mind. And so you have to be in the text for a while before a new mind will grow. Otherwise, you're doing commentary from Torah, and that we know so well, so it's very hard to shake that off. But I should tell you also that in the process of what we're doing, we'll always go back. We go to Tamar is a Talmud scholar, so she brings from that, and we go to Rashi, and we go there. Especially when the verses are very obscure, and when you want to know how they dealt with certain words and names and stuff like that. But yeah, no, the idea is that this is a living Torah. We're not finishing anything. I just opened the door. But this has to be a collective work. It has to be in the same way that it is a collective work. It has to be whoever is inclined. And I'm saying, if this is uncomfortable for you, it's perfectly fine. It's not for you. No worries. There's a huge library, enormous library. But if you're inclined to discover, if you are seeking that kind of discovery, there's something really interesting that is becoming available here. This is my take on it. Do you have another take? We need that because that's how we can see better. Also, the other thing we did that we learned that was really striking is that we had to also change the gender of the sacrificial animals.
That was in the Binding of Isaac story too, by the way, that came up earlier. Little moment where it's Ayelet instead of Ayal, a doe.
Yes.
That rocked my world.
Yes. And imagine that in Vatikra, Leviticus, with all the sacrificial animals and all the law around sacrifice. So now it's the cow. And it's, we did it because it felt different, it felt different. We heard it differently. And the people described in these stories are very close to their animals. So you feel this kind of intimacy.
So as we wrap it up, I want to ask you again about the process of creating this. I want to ask you a little bit about the experience of doing this, because when you talk, there's a certain element where I almost feel like the spirit of prophecy is coming over you. Where there's something where you read in the Bible of sometimes when that happens to some of the prophets, or King Saul, it talks about that, sort of the spirit of prophecy comes over him. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about the feeling of being immersed in it for years and years. And are you channeling something? Do you feel like you're channeling something? And if so, what is it that you're channeling? That's question number one. The other question is, can you talk a little bit about, having had this experience, what do you think we could do in the Jewish world today that would enable more people to engage in the kind of creative work in which you've engaged? You said that there's some people that part of it is innate, part of it is just, are you an artistic type? But I think there are a lot of artistic types that may not have gone and become professional artists, and there are others who may not know whether they are or whether they aren't. Is there a pathway that you imagine might be a pathway that would help people kind of get onto a pathway of their experience of Judaism being one of creativity and reimagination and play and reshaping, rather than the experience that I think most of us have had in our Jewish upbringings and education?
So I will try and answer the first one. When I did it the first time and I realized that there's a lot more here, it felt like a door opened. When I felt that, the other feeling that came immediately afterward was that I am not allowed to keep it for myself. It's my obligation to make it known so whoever needs it can have it. It's not an expression of my ego. I happen to be there, and I happen to be the person who has the combination of tools and chutzpah. I have a kind of a personality defect. I don't have an innate reverence for authority. I mean, you can come up with a good argument and I say, okay, yeah, I accept that argument. This is a great argument. But just by default that someone is a rabbi or not a rabbi doesn't mean anything to me. So I don't know. It's hard. It's a little hard. Sometimes something like that, things like that land on people, on just regular people, just a regular person. I'm not even going to hide. I'm going to try and pretend that I'm a prophet or anything like that. No, I'm Yael. I'm an artist. This is the story. But there's also, the spiritual practice, and the spiritual practice, the instruction was to create vessels for the divine, and this does that. The other question is, it's very hard to, I've taught art. You can try and, what I'm doing is not complicated. It's available to anyone. Why it hasn't happened? That's something people ask me. Has that happened? And variations of that have happened, but it didn't take them far enough, because the question is not the God. God is an abstraction. The question is human relations. And it didn't go past, there's the maybe feminization of the God language, but not that switch of the human relationship. That's where it's happening. And that's what we've done.
Thank you so much, Yael Kanarek, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I wish we could talk for another 10 hours. There's so much to plow into.
Yes, another 10 hours sometime would be awesome. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see when the next good opportunity is to have you back on. We'd love to have more of these conversations. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. As a reminder, like Dan mentioned at the top, you can learn more about this project, about this Torah Ta project, at beittorahtah.org. That's BEITTORATAH.org. You can learn more about Yael, learn more about the project, all sorts of good stuff. And you can contact her and learn what your role can be in this project moving forward too, because like she said, this is a collective effort. So thank you for listening again. We want to close out this episode in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. And there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can hit us up on Twitter or on Instagram, also Judaism Unbound. Third, you can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And last but not least, you can hit us up via email at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. The last request we like to make is that we really deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you can send our way, and you can do that via JudaismUnbound.com/donate on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift. So thank you so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.